Thank you all for taking a little bit of your evening out to talk to me. I've really enjoyed getting to meet each one of you. And this, I guess, will be the dessert table, so we did save the best for last. And all together. One of the things I just wanted to point out that it's always, I work with a lot of organizations. And one of the things that always impressed me about Reading in Motion, and I say this with all of these series, Reading in Motion is an organization that takes data more seriously than any other I've ever worked with. This is an organization that takes data so seriously they do things that you just wouldn't recommend they do. We managed to get a peer-reviewed journal article published showing that their work was significantly improved reading outcomes well above what control classrooms did using a randomized design. And we were very impressed with it. They didn't like the fact that it took a year to get published, and we told them that was fast. But so what did they do? They looked at it and they said, "This is really great." For about a year, they kind of piped it up, and then after a year, they said, "Okay, we're going to put that program aside. We don't want to do that anymore. We're going to build a new program." And I'm thinking, wait a minute, people would just kill for those results. What do you mean? They said, well, it shows that we're better than down the hall. That's not good enough. We need 100% of kids to be reading at level. And so doing better than not good isn't good enough. And so they've consistently been focused on that kind of improvement. So for that, I've always been just very impressed. And I'm thrilled to be here and have a chance to share my approach to sort of using data and thinking about data in a slightly different context, which is around hiring. So what I want to do, I'm going to talk to you tonight. I was thinking about how do I do this? How do I do this without PowerPoint slides? And so what I've come up with is I want to share with you 7 assertions, 7 things that I would contend are true facts based on the research that we've published here around how to do hiring that hopefully will cause at least a little bit of controversy and debate. I hope we get a little back and forth. I'll leave some time for questions at the end. And they will get you into the book as we do it. So some of them will allow you to look at the 2 or 3 pictures that I managed to get in the book. But I won't have you reading anything, I promise you that. And if I can get the audio to work, we'll have at least one opportunity to hear from a teacher applicant tonight and listen to that. So what I want to do is let me hand these around. If somebody can help me. See, I'll do half this way. This is kind of the outline of what I'll be talking about. That's half, so if you could, So the first one's really easy. You don't need much to read. This is really just a framework to keep me honest, if nothing else. So the first assertion that I would like to put out for you about one step back. Let me start with what it is that you're going to get today. So let me ask this question: how many of you have ever hired a teacher? So just raise your hand. I know not all of your principals, and keep your hands up there. Now, how many of you are reasonably confident that you have made at least one mistake in that hiring process? Nobody put their hands down, and a couple people asked. So here's what I want you to do. Write down on the top of the piece of paper in front of you about how many mistakes you think you've made in your career in hiring. Just about. Rough numbers. Round it to the nearest hundreds, you'll be fine. Tens, I don't know. Just write a number down. Now I haven't quite yet gotten into the different kinds of mistakes, so I'll let you define that for the moment. So here's if I've been successful tonight in just giving you a few tidbits and certainly hopefully through the book, I will not have turned that number for you in the future into 0. One of the things you have to know about hiring is you will make mistakes. You're going to make mistakes. It's an imperfect process. Fantastic correlation coefficients, fantastic flippies are in the 0.57 range. I mean, 1 doesn't have, you do not get perfect predictions. But what I will promise you is that if you follow these methods and you pick up a few of the things that I share with you, the number that you've written down as a percentage of the number of teachers you've hired will decrease. You will make less errors by following these methods than you will otherwise. That is a fact, and the data and the science behind that is well established. And that's the core premise here. Is we're trying to help you make better hires, and that's why I hire better teachers now. Not necessarily great, right? Great, yes, it'd be good, but better. If you can do better than what you're doing now, it will have a significant impact on your school. And that's assertion number one, that if you get better teachers in the school, you will have better educational outcomes. Anybody disagree with that? Better teachers are going to get you better. So, very premise. If you believe in that, which I wasn't surprised that you did believe, then you have to believe that getting better at choosing is going to make a difference in what you're all about. So, putting time and investing time up front in screening is going to drive to your mission. And that's the thing that I think principals often overlook, and not all of them. Plenty of principals put a lot of time and energy into it. But the ones that don't necessarily recognize that you're making a long-term investment here. This decision you're going to make is a very long-term decision, and you need to realize that and put the time and energy into doing it well. So my hope is that taking that as a premise will help guide you in terms of your investment in this process. Just because I promised some research, I will point, there's a great researcher out of Stanford, Eric Hemschick, and he actually did a study to answer this. He didn't take our view of, of course, better teachers have better outcomes at face value. He did some research and he quantified it. And what he found was that if you compare good teachers to mediocre teachers, good teachers are going to get about 1.5 years of improvement in student achievement, and mediocre teachers are going to get about half a year. You can read the research. It's pretty thorough. They don't let those slackers into Stanford, so I'm pretty sure you got it right. Point being, there's some data to point this out. It's not just your instinct. So again, the big message from this is invest the time and energy in doing teacher hiring, but do it better. That's assertion number one. Okay, now that one was easy, right? I started with the easy one. The second one might be a little harder to take. So the second one is that your hiring instincts are not as good as you think. Okay? Now, how do I know that? Anybody here ever do a validity study of their own hiring methods to demonstrate the effectiveness of they're not as good as you think? So this is going to be our first chance to take a look. Let's take a look at a picture. So if you look at figure 3.3, it's on page 55, yes. Look in your book at page 55. I had these all numbered. That was just so good. So what does page 55 tell us? Scatter plot, right? Scatter plot that looks at very systematically the relationship between your success in an interview or an application test and performance on the job. And what it does is it plots out high scores on the screening results up high and high scores on the job on the bottom. And what you're looking at here is a correlation. This is a heavenly correlation. Notice it's not perfect. It's not zero errors, right? But this is a fantastic correlation. Now, look on the next page, and you'll see a little bit more round, right? In our stats classes, we call this the fat cigar and the skinny cigar. So you want skinny cigars in hiring. So the notion here is, which one of these are you? Do you know? Do you know the correlation between the scores that you give on interviews, or even if it's a pass-fail score, it's a 1 or 0? But do you know the relationship between someone succeeding in your interview process and how well they succeed on the job? Now, I will contend to you that you do know, but you do know it in the same way that we all know about the stocks we picked that were right. I remember those ones. The ones that didn't work out, they fade to memory. So you've got to be very careful about how you think about things. We tend to self-justify. And doing the research and methodically thinking about, well, gee, how am I doing? How many mistakes have I made? Do I know I'm going to make some? And how well am I relating to actual performance on the job in terms of how I've scored people and how well they're doing in my screening process. Now, if not knowing isn't enough, I'll give you another good example. This was an interesting one. So in the city of Houston, they had they documented their hiring process. They were screening across the city 1,500, hiring 1,500 teachers. And they thought, well, gee, maybe we should do this in a different way instead of just letting principals decide and letting them all do whatever they do. Let's put some standardized processes into place. I'm sure this notion is just a wonderful thing for you all. Looking forward to that idea. But the interesting part about this approach was one thing they did is they asked all the applicants to complete a 5th grade math test. It seemed like a reasonable thing if you're going to teach 5th grade math or above. Probably ought to be able to pass 5th grade math. Anybody want to venture a guess as to what percentage of people failed that test? Anybody think, let's go 5%? More? Up? Okay. 10%? 15? 20? 25? 30? Now we're starting to get 30% of applicants fail the 5th grade math test. How many of your applicants failed the 5th grade math test? Don't know. Well, here's the thing. You hire somebody who's really impressive, and boy, they're great, and they can talk about all their experience, but do you really know what their skills are and what their competencies are? And what have you done to evaluate the things that are most important for your school? If you don't know, find out, because you probably are making more errors than you could otherwise. So that's assertion number 2. If you don't look, you don't know. So you need to look. It's real important. Let's see. So assertion number 3 is an interesting one. Anybody here involved in any professional development for teachers? Professional development? Pretty common, right? Yeah. A lot of effort goes into professional development, right? Well, a certain percentage of that, I don't know any documentation of exactly what it is, but a certain percentage of that is remediation, right? There's a lot of, how do I fix this teacher? Right? There's a lot of energy in one of the tables we were talking about. What do I do with these toxic teachers that are infecting the culture of our school? How do I deal with that? So if you're gonna have a lot of your time, and as a principal, you're spending a lot of time on the problem teachers, whether it's because they can't instruct, they don't know the teachers, or they're being toxic, you might realize that the time and energy you invest on the back end fixing those problems is considerably less if you start off in the first place by getting better teachers. So take some of that energy that you invest on the back end and repurpose it to the front end to be more careful. You're going to end up with a lot better outcomes and a lot more time in the evenings to do things like this, rather than fret over what you're going to do tomorrow when you've done to talk to the union rep or whatever the case may be. Now, as you may know, the United States has been, ranked as not necessarily at the top of their education globally for a while. Anybody have an idea of where we're at roughly right about now? Anybody? In the world? 30, I heard. I believe it's 29, at least again when he did this study. So he looked at the rankings, 29th. And he said, well, gee, you know what? If we were to cut the bottom layer off, we would be almost as good as Canada. Almost at number 7. So just making that kind of change on the upfront. Again, now I'm not suggesting that as a policy, and neither was he. But he's using it again to make that point that if you start off with that better group of teacher, it's just going to make a huge difference. Here's another interesting stat, and I cite this in the book as well. Anybody here ever fire a teacher in the city of Chicago? Fire a teacher? Any easy, difficult, fun, look forward to it, would do it again in a heartbeat? Same teacher, you would do it again in a heartbeat. Well, good for you, and good for all of you that have gone through that very difficult process. What we saw suggested that the number of steps required to fire a teacher in the city of Chicago, 27. 27 steps. How long does it take? How long did it take you guys?
Too long.
How long?
Too long.
Too long. Estimates are 2 to 5 years. So you can expect 2 years. 2-year battle for sure. But 5, not unexpected. So again, if you're looking at bringing somebody into your school who it may take you 5 years to remove, you may want to think twice. maybe 3 times, about putting some investment up front, is how you go about doing it. Another interesting factoid on that same point. In 2007, there were 55,000 teachers in New York City. How many teachers were fired of the 55,000? How many? 3,000 out of 55,000. Good.
200.
200.
10.
10.
5.
5. Now, I was talking. You worked in the corporate setting. What ballpark? What would you say in a corporate setting? A company with 55,000 employees. How many might get fired in a year? A couple thousand, right? To 2,000. It was 10. Oh my goodness. 10 teachers. Now you can't tell me that there were 10 teachers in the city of New York out of 55,000 who deserved it. Why was that? Do you know how much it cost to fire each one of them? $250,000. So you're making a decision that has significant consequences. Again, I can't emphasize enough. Fixing the problems is a lot harder than preventing them. So put the time and effort in up front, and you can avoid many of these headaches. I can't promise you 0, but I can promise you less. So it's worth spending some time in up front. Okay. Let's see. Assertion number 4. This is where we're going to get a little bit more interactive. You're going to need your books here. I'm going to give you a bit of an exercise. So assertion number 4 is you can't find a good teacher until you know what you're looking for. Okay. Now this is an interesting one. I was telling a couple people when we first published this book, the Harvard folks were real interested in what our model of teacher effectiveness was, and the research that we had to prove that model of teacher effectiveness worked. That's kind of what we thought the book was going to be, or they thought the book was going to be about. And actually what we pointed out to them was that we don't have a model. We don't have a list of 10 characteristics which, if you can screen for those things, you're going to get better teachers. Because our belief is that the definition of success for a teacher is locally construed. And locally, when I say locally, I mean down to the school. You've got a particular school with a particular population, with a particular set of teachers, a particular set of challenges, its own history, its own focus, its own mission. And that's knowing that and matching to that is what's going to make an effective teacher. So trying to impose a standardized model isn't going to work. So let's take a look for you at what defining teacher effectiveness is. So go ahead and look on page, I believe it's 56, and we're going to define, did it say 36 or you're on typo there yet? It's probably on 36.
List of teacher knowledge skills?
Yes, it would be, thank you. It starts on page 36, goes all the way to page 38. So what I want you to do is to look through that list and find the 3 most important things for teacher effectiveness. So just pick 3, and I'm gonna write them down. So take a quick look through there and see if you can find the 3 most important. To teacher success. If you're gonna hire teachers, which 3 are you gonna rest on? These are the 3 I'm gonna stand on as the most important. That's us. Absolutely. That's what it's important. Only 3. You only get 3. The 3 most important. All right, so let me get a couple here. If you've got three, just sound them out for me, and I'm going to put them up here. Okay. 20. And we'll go with numbers to start with. So 24. Which ones? 40.
46.
46. All right. Yep.
46.
All right.
42. And 16.
Okay. Others?
I got 10.
24. Oh, I got 24, yeah. Good.
10.
There was a 10 over here.
10, okay. No.
Okay, what is 10? We're looking at 10.
37.
8.
8. 28.
18.
18.
10.
10, we got a grand.
Oh, going one?
Yeah, right.
12. 5. 22. 2.
Three, that's sort of the same. It's crazy.
So, 44, did I get? Gotta have 44. Critical. I'm gonna put a star by 44. Gotta have it. So, 20, what, 20?
46 on there?
26? Yeah, 46? Yeah, 46 is up here. So, is one of them, is there one on there for following instructions? So I thought I said 3. But there's like more than 3. And how is that? Because, I mean, you guys are all smart, bright principals, so shouldn't there just be 3 things that make a teacher effective?
Yeah.
And shouldn't you all know what they are? And shouldn't you all agree on them? No, you shouldn't. What you should do is look at the fact that the first person that those 3 at that school are most important. And how do you know? Because you know your school, and you know it's going to work. And don't let that person sit next to you tell you that 42 matters, because it may not at your school. And so the first point here, and the first premise, is to recognize this fact, to recognize that what works at your school is what you have in mind. Now you can use this list. We came up with this list. We said we were very careful about how we came up with this list. We looked at all the models, the Teach for Americas, the Denisons, everything. And we interviewed teachers, we surveyed 400 of them, we did focus groups, and we came up with the biggest list we could come up with that made sense. Of course, people have slightly different names for things, so we combined them. But the notion was, here's a menu of items for you to pick what's going to work well at your school, and to then use those to drive your hiring process. Now, you can do this yourself. Depends again on your school. Or you can involve your teachers. You can get your teachers. Maybe it's your teacher leadership to look at these things and say, what's most important to us? What do we care about the most? What's going to get us where we're headed? The mission for our school, and how do we know, and why? You can have a very rich conversation about all of these different things. You can define them differently. Don't take them just out of the book. tailor them to your organization. And so by doing that, by recognizing that you can construe it locally, you can get results for your school. But again, don't look for a standardized model that may or may not work. There may be a standard model that works great, fantastic, saves you some time. But there are some benefits to getting buy-in from your teachers and your leadership around what is it that we care about most. What are we willing to stand on? And it's not going to be 3. But also, don't let it be 49. 10, 12 things, sure. 49 would be great, but you don't have that much time to spend hiring. So if you can build your hiring process around 10 to 12 of these things, then you can get the ones that matter most, and you're screening in the teachers that are going to get your school where it needs to go. So that's the premise here, and that's really what we're trying to advocate for. This is the foundation for really all the work that we talk about. It feeds into every kind of process. You can use this and you can map these different dimensions onto your interview process. Which interview questions do you have that fit each one of these things? Score it accordingly, right? So that's really the premise, that's the starting point. And that's what we're recommending, is that you start with what matters most for us and you measure according to that. Let's back into some of the data a little bit. So assertion number 5. Not all hiring tools are created equal. So one of the things we did there on, I believe it's page 58, if I have it right, is we looked at the research on various hiring tools. Which ones work better than others? So, for example, my personal favorite, I insist on keeping this in here, Graphology. Anybody know what Graphology is? Handwriting analysis. Very popular in Europe. Related to performance? Not so much. Correlation 0.04. That's as close to 0 as you want to get. On the other hand, all the way at the top of the spectrum there, structured interviews. A well-designed structured interview, 0.57. That's a very strong correlation. I'm not going to get into the statistics, but let's just say that's the skinny cigar, and the other ones on the bottom are a lot more round and close to random. Okay? So knowing what are the methods that are going to make the biggest difference. Now, more than likely, some of these things are included in some of your hiring processes. So a couple of other interesting comparisons. Job experience. Job experience seems like a good thing to have, right? It's about 5 times less effective than a structured interview at predicting performance. I get into the math about how I got there. It has to do with percent of variance accounted for, and I'm not going to get into that right now. But suffice it to say, the job experience is not irrelevant, but it's not as good as a well-designed structured interview. Any of those surprise you there? Grades is a good one. I like that one. Google was very, very into grades for a long time, and they recently discovered something that us psychologists have known for a long time, which is that they don't really work that well to predict performance. What was the one that you were supposed to say? Education, yes, 0.10. That's a very weak correlation. So how much education? Of course, there's probably a bottom out there somewhere. You don't want elementary school students teaching high school students, things like that. But again, the amount of education, the quality of education is not necessarily predicted. There are some organizations that might not like to hear that, but this table is based on literally hundreds of thousands of data points. It's as stable as it gets. So the point here is to recognize that if you're going to start by picking a process, start with this list and start at the top. Do the things at the top. Use ones that are already known to work better, and you're going to be better off just by choosing wisely there. Now, there are some nuances about how to do these kinds of things that, again, of course, the book gets into quite a bit of detail. So, again, recognizing that there's a difference, there's a significant difference between the tools you choose. The nice segue to assertion number 6 is that probably the most effective thing that you can do is to structure your interview, right? Even just looking at this chart, if you look at the top, structured interview correlates at 0.57 across lots of different research. Unstructured interview, same methodology, but not structured. unstructured interview, 0.20. Big difference there in terms of prediction.
Can I
So
ask a question?
please.
So does this have to do with any kind of job? Are these studies about any kind of job, or are they about education?
These are studies across many different types of jobs. So it's really specific to the methodology here, and this speaks to which of these methods is a better predictor of performance, but it's not specific to the teacher role.
Right. So there's no studies that talk about which of these would have the highest correlation to student learning outcomes.
That work is nascent at best. And what I would actually say is you want to be thoughtful about tailoring. So did everybody hear the question? Is there any research correlating certain methods to student outcomes? I think what you want to be careful about with that is that it's localized research. So this is pretty generalized in terms of which methods are going to work best. I would want to know about that locally at your particular institution, because again, which things are included and which ones fit. The fact that you're going to have different screening for different things by default means that it's going to exactly. So you got to be careful about generalizing across schools. It literally needs to be tailored. Now there may be certain things that you could get at. So you could say sort of instructional skill, or there could be certain competencies where you might be able to generalize across. But some of these things you really want to have some local research for. Great question. Okay, so probably the least expensive and most effective thing you can do. How many of those who have done hiring have used interviews? Right? Used interviews in the hiring process? Pretty ubiquitous, right? Almost everyone's doing that at some level. You'd like to talk to the person. Big data, it's out there, but it's not quite ready to just send us the people. We might want to actually see them. So probably the best thing you can do is to really think about structuring your interview process. That's a pretty involved. It's so involved I got an entire chapter on it. Right? So there's an entire chapter on structuring your interview process. But let me give you an opportunity to see sort of firsthand why that might be helpful. So what I've done, I've got a teacher applicant here. I'm going to try to play this, and I'm hoping the audio will maybe to hush for a moment to be able to hear this in the back end. What I've got here is I've got a teacher applicant who's been asked a question, and the question, unfortunately, the question gets cut off. But the question is basically. So as a teacher in a school, we all have kind of roles that we play and certain things that we know we're required to do. But inevitably, there are things at the school that kind of slip through the cracks that people overlook. And can you give an example of a time where you saw something slipping through the cracks or wasn't getting done, where you stepped up to the plate and addressed it? Okay, pretty straightforward. This ties into some leadership issues, looking for teachers that want to take responsibility and initiative. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play her response. It's about 3 minutes. I'm going to play her response. And what I want you to do is I want you to rate her response. Okay. So this is one of the first things you can do in structuring an interview is to actually score it. Okay. Instead of just pass, fail, put some numbers up there. So here's what we're going to do. 1 is going to be bad response, and a 5 is going to be exceptional. Okay? So 1 to 5, you're going to rate this response in terms of how well she does. Okay? Okay, here we go. I'll try to see if I get the sound right. And
assigned job duties within the school environment, but often things still get overlooked. Can you give me an example of a time at a previous job or maybe a current job where you saw an issue that went unnoticed?
I can answer that one, unfortunately. So, in our staff copy room, there's a table. And the table usually has a lot of things on the table. Sometimes the materials are random papers that have been printed out of the copy machines or printed out from the printer in the other corner of the room. And sometimes there are no names on the papers, so you don't know who the papers belong to. And granted, in that same room, you have all the teachers' boxes. So that the papers have a teacher's name on it, it's easy for me to put it in that box. But a challenge that I would say a challenge that some of the members of my staff were having was that it was getting to be a table where everyone just left everything. Nothing was being recycled. Nothing was being claimed after 5 days. At the end of the week, there were still copies there. And I'm on the social committee at my school. I'm actually the social committee chair. And what I help to do is when there are situations like this where an issue has come up and there needs to be something to fix the issue, as something as little as a table that's not organized in the staff copy room, what I had done was I emailed a couple of my colleagues and asked, colleagues that were not on the social committee, I just emailed them and asked what they would like to have done with that table. And for me, I emailed a couple of colleagues that I just wanted to receive really quick responses from. Like, if you were me in this situation, if you had a lot of papers on the table that you like to use as your workspace, but the workspace is being affected by all of the mounds of things that are piling up, what would you do with the mounds of papers, and what would be the best thing? And so when I emailed a couple of my colleagues, one of my colleagues wrote back and said, well, maybe we should just write a little sign, a green triangular sign, and write in black Sharpie on the front, please claim your extra copies of papers. We want to make sure that everyone has their stuff so we don't have to throw it away. So we made that sign, and then I made another sign that said, please keep this area clean, as we would like for it to be a work area while you are making your copies. So I had to make sure that I went to a couple of colleagues, of course, to get their individual opinion about it, but I used that information to help me figure out, well, we can just put a couple of signs up, and the signs might help to remind people that let's keep the space clean. Pamphlets and brochures for the PTA can go on that wall, and et cetera, et cetera.
And did the table stay clean?
No.
Okay, so there's her answer, and you're gonna rate it from 1 to 5. How much of a leader in the school is this woman going to be?
Are we calling down?
So yeah, just write your number down, and then I'm gonna ask you what you're Okay, have people got their numbers? Yes. You got the numbers? All right. How many ones? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. How many twos? 2, 3, 4, 6, 10. And then how many threes? 2, 3. 3 of those. Any fours? 4, good. Wait, I'm lining up 4 right here, sorry about that. And then, were there any 5s? Anybody thought she did just a great job? Okay, so what we see here is my inability to write down score. That's an error you just gotta live with. Right? So, what we see here is that there's kind of a downward skew. People generally thought she didn't do that well on the dimension that we've got here. This ties into initiative, right? So to what degree does she take initiative? Is she going to be one of those leaders that's trying to make things better? I was saying earlier, is this the kind of person that sits there and says, hey, there's staplers missing out of the stapler, it's empty? Or is this the kind of person that gets up and gets the staples and puts them in? Doesn't even mention it. So people generally feel she's kind of on the downside, right? Was it easy to make the rating?
Yes.
Okay. Easy to make the rating. Anybody find it difficult to make the rating? Carl.
The one.
Yeah. So why was it difficult?
Yeah, because the criteria for that general category of whatever the what is it? Leadership initiative, or
Yeah.
I don't know what the criteria are for it.
Right. So we don't know the dimension. I didn't spend nearly enough time explaining the dimension. So how well did I train my raters? Not very well. You didn't know what the overall dimension was very well, and you don't really know what these different metrics are. If you were really specific about what you were looking for in each one of these, you really would be able to get quite a bit more agreement among your raters. You'd have better inter-rater reliability. You're more confident that you've got an accurate rating. Now, the other thing notice that you get, though, if you get real specific about what these are, is you get your teachers knowing and your leaders knowing what really initiative looks like. Is it bad or good, or is it really, we expect you to be responsible for this? Right? A lot of what she did was very passive, right? It was kind of, well, I'll see what other people think, and I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings, and, is that boldly, like, defining that so that the other teachers can then look at it and go, oh, no, that's not what leadership is. We need something else. So it can have real positive effects culturally as you get specific, not just at defining the dimension, but then specific at defining these scores. But nonetheless, you still have, even with this, you still have better structure than if it was just pass-fail. Some of you would have failed her at this level, 2 and below. Others would have failed here. Somebody might have said only if it was a 1. So having clarity around what does pass-fail mean on this dimension is important.
I'm interested to know if the 5 and the 10, of the people who are 5s and who said, the 15 people,
This group here.
are you principals? I'm really curious about
Yes.
that.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes?
Yeah.
No. But you do hire people. Okay, so I was just really interested in that. That was interesting.
Well, and again, spending the time to realize this, initiative and leadership is important at our school. We need that. We need people who are going to step up and not just kind of, go around the edges of how to clean the table. They're going to find a way to get it done. That's what we need, and we're going to stand on that. Gets you where you want to go. But again, not knowing that. The other thing, and there's lots about this, but we of course also asked her a specific question about her past. We didn't say, well, what should you do to be a good leader? Right? We said, give us an example of a time, and she put us fly on the wall in a room with what she actually did, not what she thinks your answer is and what you want. And that's a very powerful shift, and we talk about that quite a bit in the book. So let me give you a couple other things you can do, just tips right off the bat. Again, there's a whole chapter on it. There's a couple things you can do specifically when you want to structure an interview that are going to be really helpful. Number 1, ask candidates all the same questions. Right? Very important. How do you compare apples to apples if you ask the easy questions of this person and the hard questions of this person? Now, why do you want to do that? Well, it turns out that I asked all the tall people the easy questions and all the short people the hard questions, and we've got a really tall staff, which means we've got a great staff student basketball team, but I don't know if our teachers are any good, right? So you don't know the biases that you've got. If you don't have structure, you don't know what's creeping into those mistakes, and there can be systematic bias. What we know about human cognition is that we have bias. We make these kinds of mistakes. So if we build structure in, we can eliminate a lot of those. So ask the same questions. The other thing is behavioral or situational questions. Do not ask the question, if you were an animal, what kind of animal would you be? Eliminate that from your lexicon. Not a good question. Behavioral questions. Give me a time when you did this thing. Very difficult to fake that. People have a very hard time getting past it because give me the situation. We talk about how you can do that. Formally score, right? One of the great things about formally scoring here, and it was great when you guys started doing this, what happened? The first thing that happened, did everyone just kind of... No. So what did you do? You talked to a colleague.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I was just thinking about earlier when you asked that question, like how difficult it was. In an unstructured interview, it wouldn't be difficult for me to rate it because I would go with like my gut and say, okay, this person is terrible. But in structure, I'm trying to align that evidence with a certain factor,
Right.
and then also isolate that evidence from everything else. So
Right. And so when you go with your gut, what do? You rely on heuristics. You rely on bias that you don't know anything about. But when you force yourself to be thoughtful, then you can compare. The other thing you can do, you guys had it a little bit flipped. One of you observes the answer and rates it a 1, and one of you observes the answer and rates it a 5. Now you have an interesting conversation. Why did you give it a 5? Why did you give it a 1? Well, I don't know. Let's go back and we'll do our fourth recommendation. Let's look back at the notes that we took while they answered the survey that we didn't score. Okay, so when you're taking notes in an interview, don't score them. Don't be thinking, oh, yeah, she's doing really well on this one. That's cognitive energy that you can't spend on being really careful about writing down what she said, which you can then evaluate later. Okay, so you want to spend time writing down carefully what they said and then score it later, and then you can discuss, well, I heard this, you heard that. Yeah.
So I'm just curious as to how much, and I know they say when you interview, straight face, no emotion, but the fact of the matter is you're interacting with a human being.
Yes.
So, I mean, how much of that do you play to or not play to in a situation like that? Because some things you just don't overlook.
Right.
They're behavioral characteristics.
So one of the things is that applicants don't usually like structured interviews. They don't like it. It's you've got to almost train them into answering the way you want them to answer. So what I usually recommend is you start off being really friendly. Great to have you. Spend 5-10 minutes on it. It's so wonderful to have you here. And then spend a little bit of time explaining, okay, this interview is going to be a little different. And I need you to, answer in these kinds of ways. And so, please do this. And then we'll check in afterwards, and I'll give you a chance to ask your own questions. Because one of the things they don't like is they can't derail it into, that's a hard question. Let me ask them a question, and we'll see if we can get on a different path, right? Which happens in an unstructured interview. So questions at the beginning, questions at the end, but in the middle, yes, you're going to be sweating bullets, or rather they're going to be sweating bullets. But again, you can do it in a friendly way. You can say, this is a methodology we're using. We're very careful about it. Thrilled you're here. Let's go into it. And usually once people get into it, it works reasonably well, but it takes a little time to get them there. You also want to train interviewers. So have the discussion of what is a 1, what is a 5 before you go in, right? Really, really important. And then ideally, in the same way that you want to ask the same interview questions, you want the same interviewers, if you can, between candidates. Now, if you do really good rater training, you don't necessarily need to do that, because if you get everyone agreeing on what a 5 is and what a 1 is, then you're fine. But in an ideal scenario, you want to use the same panel if you're doing that for different people, so you don't have real different heuristics. Yeah.
So we were talking about, we do interview, and so these 5 of us, we interview together. But we were talking about having someone who kind of asks the question, and then that other person in the room who's just kind of typing out responses or jotting down, just kind of thinking about like just collecting evidence. Because we were thinking about sometimes when you're in the moment and you're interacting with a person, you don't really catch everything.
Yeah.
You think you heard this, but you might not have actually heard that. It might have been what you wanted to hear. And so then coming back together and saying, okay, this is the evidence, and as a team saying, where would we say this falls?
Yeah, and the only thing I would add to that is I wouldn't just have 1 of 5. You really ought to have all the interviewers jotting notes, and maybe the person that's asking questions has a little bit less information, but you really want everybody taking down those notes, because you'd be surprised. All together, you get the real sense of the data exactly. And so when you go back, if it's like 5, 4, 5, 4, 1, you can go back to your notes and you go, what'd you put a 1 for?
Right.
Because they said this. Oh, I didn't realize. Okay, let's move back up to a 4. Surely not a 1, or maybe that one person caught it and everyone else was bowled over. So I would have had even more people actually collecting the scores. All right, so the last one is, and this was, I'll say, this is just a small tidbit. One of the funnest parts of the book was I actually got to design all the graphs and stuff. I've been reading other people's graphs forever, and so I had a lot of fun doing that. And so I also designed the hiring funnel, right? So if you look on page 65, the gist here is, put your most effective, least expensive screening devices first. So your most valuable asset is your time. Have a methodical way that you screen through application forms that does some scoring like this, but make that easiest, quickest thing come first, and also, of course, the most effective thing. So you want to kind of think about your hiring funnel. What's the sequence? What's the right sequence here? If you put your interview up front, and then there are easier, less expensive things later on, you're going to have a lot more people to have to interview. And again, your time is your most valuable resource. So be thoughtful about how much time and which one is most effective. You've got some tools in here to define which ones are most effective, but you want that most effective, least expensive tool up front, and then move it down from there. And then generally by the end is your the thing that is most critical and most expensive, and that ought to be your last item. So being thoughtful about the hiring funnel, really, really important. Again, a lot of this is about being reflective on your process, right? And knowing what is that process, what are the steps that I'm trying to follow. What I would close with is that if there's any message that I'd like you to leave with here today, it's that being thoughtful and methodical about the way you do hiring can have a huge impact on your school. But you do need to invest that time. It's an investment. Invest it up front, work with your colleagues, and link everything you're doing back to that mission that you're trying to achieve. At the end of the day, all of these things are as far away as you can get from an isolated HR practice. This is one of the most powerful tools you can use to improve your school, to improve educational outcomes. So invest in it up front. Spend the time making sure it's right. And as we talk about in Chapter 9, don't feel like you have to boil the ocean. Don't feel like you have to do it all at once. You can just take one interview and do something like this. You can just take the time to link your interview to your dimensions so that all the interviewers know what is it that I'm looking for, what is it that we're trying to measure. Even that will make an improvement in what you're trying to get in the end, which are, of course, better teachers. So take it slow, one bit at a time. If you've got the appetite for doing the whole thing, that's fantastic. But just take it slow, and each year make it that much better. You've got the tools in the book to do it. And with that, I will leave you to your dessert. As Carl pointed out, far be it from me to be between you and sweets. Thank you very much.
Let me just ask if there are any other questions. Maybe a couple now, and then Dale will be available.
As long as you need. Yeah.
We're eating already.
Yeah, that's fine.
All right, so don't chop our head off.
Group interviews. Why would I chop your head off about it?
That's the thing. We're like, but yeah. Thinking about time and thinking about just having like a first round of some very basic questions, being able to do it in a group versus asking basic questions to every single person.
Right. So generally, the big issue with group interviews is time. You've got to think about what's my investment of time and where do I want to put that. So there are examples where the principal just does the whole thing. That's it. Maybe that works in your school. Maybe that doesn't. Not so much. I'm getting that. So with group interviews, you want to standardize some things, but I would also be thoughtful about maybe I don't need 5. Maybe 3 is enough. And which 3 are really critical. So often, for example, you want to make sure there's a subject matter expert if it's a particular, science or math. Make sure somebody's there who can evaluate some aspect of the content knowledge. Content knowledge is really critical and strangely overlooked element. Yeah, so make sure you're including some content piece and that person is in there. But you do have to be careful. I remember interviewing one, actually, Lisa and I were talking about this earlier today. I remember interviewing one teacher, and she said, well, how could you possibly screen teachers if you yourself are not a teacher? I didn't have the smoothest response, I'll grant. But it comes down to this. I know what the dimensions are, I know what it means, and I can kind of score that. So I wouldn't get too caught up in it has to be someone who's going to work with them, because if you've got the criteria, you know what you're measuring. Now it may be that a grade level chair or somebody like that wants to know at some point in the process, but that may be lower in the hiring funnel than all the way at the top. So take that group and say, well, let's put you 3 up front and put you 2 down here lower, and we know that you're all trained on the right dimensions, so trust your colleagues and don't feel like you all have to do everything. I promise I won't. Good question.
You know the
This one that asks about the teacher observation piece. I've done it many times, and it feels very artificial in a lot of ways, particularly when you're in the room and the students are kind of on their best behavior and being, not like themselves. And so I'm just curious if you had any tips, or any of my colleagues had any ideas for making that a little bit more powerful and predictive of success.
So let me give you my idea, and then I'm going to turn over, because I'm sure there are other people who've got some great ideas in the room, and that's a great opportunity here. So the one thing I would say is just be really specific about what you're looking for, and be careful about being bowled over by sort of charisma or elements that may not be directly related to what you're looking. Are you looking for just instruction? Are you looking for how well does this person stick to a lesson plan? Make sure it's real clear what you're looking for, that it's not just, yeah, they did great. Because that could mean a lot of things, and you put someone new and different in there, and they're going to say, no, they were horrible, because you're looking for different things. So, colleagues, share. What ideas do you have?
So this summer, I tried something different, because that's very true, and I actually went to the site where those teachers were working already. And I actually saw them in their own environment. These are children that you've been with all summer or all year. So actually, this is your perfect environment for you to be able to show what you do best. And it was very eye-opening.
And you did that at the front of the funnel, right? So you did that for all the applicants.
I did the kind of general interview, and then we were just talking, and I did say, I don't want to go through this whole process and get in front of you and you can't teach. Yeah. So then I went to sites, and then I actually did interviews on site if I wanted to.
Right. So again, you're just being thoughtful about where am I going to do it in the process.
But I saw them in their own environment, because that you can't explain that. That's what it is.
Yeah. Nothing artificial about it.
Yep.
Great. Any other just great tips or ideas that people have run into? Okay. Oh wait, yeah.
You got any programs, more strategies around fishbowl?
Around fishbowl in terms of everybody watching the multiple people watching the same event.
Multiple people participating at the same time.
Ah, yes. So the multiple candidates in the room, right? The only reason I would use that is if one of the things on your list here is collaboration, and I would judge them on how well they collaborate. It's a wonderful way to dupe people into thinking that you're looking for them to compete against each other, and when they default into that, you've discovered their, if you will, sort of true color. So I just would be careful about what, again, a fishbowl can work, but make sure it's fitting the criteria. If you're doing, a fishbowl for, say, watching, instructional skill, it might be a little bit difficult. So for certain things, it could be really good, but make sure it fits.
We've done a case study fishbowl. So this is your classroom, these are your students, this is your data, and you are the grade level team. What would you do?
Right, and again, judging them as much on their ability to work together as the solution they came up with, right? Yeah, exactly. That's a good one. So you got to.
I was just going to say a similar thing about the fishbowl strategy. That I used to do some interviews and hiring for the New Teacher Project, and we gave them an article to read ahead of time, and then some questions to talk about, and then they had to apply it to a real life problem in a school. And then it concluded with writing a letter to the principal. It was always really insightful reading the letters that they wrote to the principal that were, kind of related to the scenarios, because you could see how they would solve problems in a school, whether they put it 100% like we need you, the principal, to do these things, or whether they take a different perspective and say, here's how we can contribute together to solving the problem. So it was not only just watching the fishbowl, but having a writing task afterwards, to get more of the individual perspective, because some people don't speak up but have very insightful things to say. Then you get it in the writing piece afterwards.
That's great. And again, score that writing piece. Be specific about what you're looking for so you can be clear and differentiate. And then also doing that, you can compare apples to apples. Yeah.
I had a question about this. I haven't forgotten you on your statistical significance of the reference checks. It was halfway down the list.
Yeah.
And I mean, we all do reference checks. We all rely on reference checks. I would have thought, well, not solely rely on it, but it's a big piece of the interviewing process. Why is that so low? I guess it's.
People lie.
Yeah.
That's the most concise way I can put it.
Yeah, but other than that,
there's a couple dimensions, right? So one thing is, they're going to pick people who are going to give them good news. One of the things, from the best reference check methodology I've found is when you can find somebody who you know well, who knows them. That I would do. But their list, I'm not even sure how much. The one thing it will give you is if you can't find 3 people who think you walk on water, then I'm not interested, right? But will it give you really the ability to differentiate? So it can help you avoid a few mistakes, but it's I wouldn't have it be your time. I would have it be someone else's time on that list. Yeah, for sure. So you had a question a little while ago. Thank you for your question.
Sure, I had a couple questions. But I
No, you only get one.
Yeah.
I think we'll make this the last
Part
question.
A. Do you know that Haberman model?
Yep.
What are your thoughts?
Familiar with it? Reasonable process. I'm concerned about this stuff, and I think it's probably pretty specific to a certain subset of schools.
Right.
I haven't spent a lot of time studying it in detail, but what I've seen of it suggests to me that it's not configurable enough, and that it tends to be skewed toward a particular population.
Right.
So I am not overwhelmed with it, but again, for your district, for your school, for your application, it could be just perfect. So I would certainly look at it and think about it, but it may not be.
So if it aligns with the values or the kind of job characteristics that we're looking for in candidates, then it's a great.
It could be great for you, exactly. Okay. But again, I still would do the work to make sure that it's working the way you think.
Yeah.
Right. In the same way you would do it just for your own stuff. So I would evaluate. Okay, is this working the way we're thinking? How many mistakes are being made here? There will be some, but. Yeah.
What about using Danielson's, especially some CPS we like Danielson, to create a structured interview around that, and just ask, how did you score on it? Okay, domain 1, domain 2, domain 3, domain 4, and then go into questions that are particular to, especially domains 2 and 3.
Yeah, so anytime you've got a framework like that makes sense to you, that fits your organization, that can help move some of the thinking forward, and then maybe connect it to some other elements within the district, evaluations, et cetera, that kind of thing, that's a good thing. I just would be real careful about the cookie cutter, this thing works. You got to stop and ask yourself, how does this work for us? I think this first step is pivotal. And maybe there's even one dimension and you just leave that off, and there's one you need to add in. But there's something about just, okay, I'm going to take this off the shelf and make it work here. You're going to have error there. And so if you look at it and you go, every one of these is perfect, I got all my top 8, fantastic, then use it. But don't just assume. Marketing can be powerful stuff.